All right. Our next presentation is going to be on opportunities for physicians in the pharmaceutical industry. And we're very pleased to have the second farthest distance of a speaker in this series. We had somebody presenting from Dubai earlier. We're proud to have Dr. Nora Philbin as our presenter. Dr. Philbin is the Global Clinical Development Medical Director at AstraZeneca, and she's currently based in Cambridge, UK. She supports clinical trials of monoclonal antibodies for prevention of infectious diseases. Dr. Philbin is a board-certified pediatrician and practiced outpatient pediatrics for over 9 years in the Chicago area before transitioning to a medical director role in clinical development and being stationed overseas. She received her DO from Touro University, California, and her MSc from Birkbeck, if I'm saying that correctly, University of London. Dr. Philbin is a Sikh alumna from a few years ago. So thank you, Dr. Philbin, for, I don't want to say coming all this way, but thank you for doing this for us.
You're welcome. Thanks, Jim. So we'll get started. So I wanted to first give a background about Pharma. What is Pharma? What do they do there? And what is working in the matrix, which is something you'll hear about throughout my talk. So pharma versus biotechs. So what is big pharma? Big pharma are the huge global companies that make drugs, right? They're the household names, Merck, Pfizer, Lilly. You've taken their drugs, you've prescribed their drugs, right? They're household names, everybody knows them. So then there are medium, small, and what they call biotech pharma. So these are smaller companies. They can be only US based, only EU based. They tend to have fewer employees. They can have 100 to 1,000 employees. They may not be publicly traded. They may have external funding. They tend to have less products and smaller pipelines, which I'll explain later in my talk. And they could be looking for their big break, right? So a lot of biotechs, they have a molecule or a drug or a device that they think is awesome, and they're looking for a buyer. Basically, they want a big pharma to come through and buy them out. And I wanted to talk about what's pharma adjacent. So before I started in pharma, I didn't know about contract research organizations or CROs. So these are companies that provide research and development services to other companies, usually larger companies. If somebody refers to their study being contracted out, that means that they've hired a CRO to execute the study for them. What's interesting about these companies is that they have a lot of the same roles as most pharma companies. So if there's a medical director, clinical development role within a pharma company, then generally there's one in the CRO as well. So these may be more accessible for entry-level physicians looking for positions. And working for a CRO, there's a potential that you get exposure to many different pharma companies. So I've listed a couple of big names, CROs here for your reference, but something to keep in mind as you begin to explore. So I want to take a little bit of time just to go through the stages of drug development. So if we look at this slide, on the left-hand side, we have discovery science. So those are studies done in the lab or studies done in animals. So it can be called preclinical studies sometimes. And then there are phase 0 studies. And those are some of the first studies just to see how the drug responds within a human body. So that is referred to in pharma generally as early stage. So you may hear that or see that when you're beginning to your exploration. Then the drug moves through the different phases of clinical trials. So a phase 1 is a trial that's done in a very small number of people, primarily healthy adults, looking at safety and sometimes at dosing. So that's going to be usually less than 100 people. Then a drug would move through to phase 2, which is a larger study, a couple of hundred people. And those studies look at the drug's effectiveness and further evaluates its safety. Then you get to phase 3. So a phase 3 trial is when a larger number, could be thousands, 3,000 to 30,000 people, are enrolled. And these studies look at efficacy and its safety and its side effects, and they'll can be compared to another drug that does a similar thing. And then finally, there's phase 4 or post-marketing. And these are studies that are done after the drug is on the market, right? So they could be something that the regulatory authorities recommended to be done after the drug goes to market. It could be just routine surveillance, could be lots of different things, but it's a drug that's already been on the market. So now you're looking at hundreds of thousands of people being exposed to this drug. And the phase 1 through the phase 4 is considered late stage in drug development. So just that we have a vocabulary around drug development. So I want to talk about the matrix. So within pharmaceutical companies, there are many functions, right? They all do different things. They all have different focuses, but they all work together. So you will often hear about matrix environment, right? So within the matrix, different people doing different things. The ones that we're going to focus on in this talk are going to be patient safety or pharmacovigilance, medical affairs, and clinical development. And those are the 3 main areas that physicians work in within pharma. And I'm going to go through each one and to kind of describe what that function does and where the opportunities for physicians are in that function. So first, we'll start with clinical development. So what is it? Clinical development is the process of developing new drugs, treatments, or devices. And clinical development is responsible for designing and conducting clinical trials, collecting, analyzing, and interpreting the data, and then presenting and reporting that data to anybody who needs it, right? Somebody in the company, regulatory authorities, or within the scientific community. In clinical development, what do physicians do? So they design clinical trials, they develop clinical development plans, they do medical monitoring, which is where we assess the safety data from a trial, and look at adverse events. So adverse events are just anything basically that happens to a participant during a trial after they've been exposed to the drug. Could be a cold, could be a broken arm, but all of that data comes in while the participant is on the trial. Another thing that physicians do is ensure data integrity. So they make sure that the right people have been enrolled in the study, that they've met the eligibility criteria, and that the sites that are doing the trial are following the protocol or the script of what's supposed to be done in this trial and looking for any deviations to make sure that when the data comes through, that it is trustworthy. You can rely on it. Another thing is data interpretation. So reviewing the results of a trial, determining if the drug is doing what it was intended to do, and then looking at risk-benefit analysis. Another thing that physicians do is often answering questions about the protocol, about the drug, from ethics committees or institutional review boards, or IRBs, or regulatory agencies, things like that. Now, since I work in clinical development, I can tell you what an average day looks like. I can't do this for the other functions, but I'll do it for clinical development. So what does an average day look like? There's a lot of emails. There are a lot of meetings. There's a lot of interaction with other functions, right? Whether that be patient safety or medical affairs, the CROs, the sites, anybody who's involved in the clinical trial or the clinical development. Key opinion leaders, so these people who are outside of the organization. So a specialist in GI diseases, a specialist in cardiology. So you may interact with people like that. There is some writing, right? So you draft management plans, you draft protocols, study reports. So there's quite a bit of writing involved. And then there's presentations, right? So presenting data, presenting results, updates on the development of the plan. And you do that to, again, people within the organization, leadership, data safety boards, things like that. And then obviously there's a lot of reading, right? Documents, scientific papers, and of course, emails. So who do you work with when you work in clinical development? Do you work with other physicians? You work with scientists, generally PhDs, but some PharmDs or other types of backgrounds. And then other people in the matrix, regulatory, they're the people who work with the regulatory agencies like the FDA, the European Medical Association or EMA in Europe, ClinOps, ClinPharm, medical affairs, lots of people within the organization. And then also the external experts, as I mentioned, the CRO, the vendors. And then you might interact with the principal investigator or a PI or the site staff who are actually running the clinical trial. And job titles. So when you're looking for a clinical development job, the titles are going to be medical director, medical monitor, study physician, global clinical lead, or director of clinical development. Somewhere in the job description, it'll say clinical development, or in the job title, it'll say clinical development. And there are two examples on the right from AbbVie for medical directors in oncology and medical director in neuroscience. So when you're looking at a job description, what's going to clue you in that it's a clinical development job is that emphasis on the clinical trials. So as you can see in the first example, planning, execution, and interpretation of clinical trials, and delivery of high quality data, right? That's what they're after. The second example, it says design and execution of ongoing and new development clinical studies, and to deliver clinical programs for registration and launch. So that's registration and launch of the drugs. And that you would be the clinical science lead. So this is the kind of thing that you'll see in descriptions, job descriptions for clinical development positions. Okay, moving on to patient safety. So what is it? So pharmacovigilance, patient safety, so they're the same thing. And that is the science and activities relating to detection, assessment, and understanding of adverse effects, like I mentioned, or any other medicine problem that might come up. So I always think of them as the detectives in pharma, right? So they're looking for signals in the data, right? So you can make decisions about whether or not there's a problem with the drug, if the clinical trial should go forward or it should stop. What do physicians do? So physicians report and analyze incidents, the adverse events. They investigate medical errors and near misses in drugs that are out on the market. So that is one thing about patient safety. They're going to look at drugs that are both in development and that are marketed. So they may be responsible for a drug that's been on the market for 5 years or 10 years, and also be responsible for drugs that are in phase 1 or phase 2, early in the clinical development. They help develop safety guidelines. They create and implement checklists to make sure that you can reduce risks. Signal detection, as I mentioned, you want to know, is there something actually going on because of the drug? And then monitoring patient safety metrics and utilizing the data to identify if there's any trends. So who do you work with? Again, primarily people within the organization. Outside of the organization, patient safety may interact with regulatory agencies like the FDA or licensing authorities, governments within countries that are deciding whether or not to license or to continue to license a particular drug. Job titles for patient safety: patient safety physician, a medical director, principal patient safety physician, director, pharmacovigilance. As you can see the example on the right, it very clearly says patient safety, right? Patient safety physician. And within a job description, they're going to talk about identifying, evaluating, and management of safety risks, and medical review of individual case reports and follow-up questions for adverse events. Okay, medical affairs. So medical affairs is about communication of information. So if you look at the image on the right, they talk about the 4 cornerstones of medical affairs: insights generation, evidence generations, medical education, and developing a scientific platform, right? So a core story about a product, a drug, a molecule. And medical affairs generates this information and they communicate it to healthcare professionals, right? Physicians, scientific leaders, patient advocacy groups, payers, policymakers. It's very outward facing. And they generate new data about the marketed drugs and about emerging treatments. And then they send that information out into the world. So what do physicians do in medical affairs? They develop this medical communication. They develop the strategy around how they're going to deploy it. They engage with experts outside of the company. They provide medical education, whether that's to docs or to other individuals who are interested, like payers. They can generate real world evidence. So look at the data of the drugs as they're being used in the world and report that back to the organization. And they can also do health economics and outcome research. So looking at trends in healthcare that they can then report back to the organization. So who do you work with? So within medical affairs, there's another position that's called a medical science liaison. And those are individuals who go out to hospitals, clinics, and they talk to physicians about drugs. So they, for me, are like the equivalent, the information equivalent of a drug rep. So medical affairs isn't commercial, right? They're not selling anything. They're not trying to convince you to buy the drug. They're giving you information about the drug and they're gathering information from you about your experiences with the drugs. So medical affairs physicians also work with the KEEs, KOLs, the key opinion leaders and the key external experts. There's a little bit of pharma abbreviations for you. Healthcare providers, like I said, payers, patient advocacy groups, and policymakers. So again, really outward facing. It's not that medical affairs never deals with ClinOps or ClinDev or safety. They absolutely do, but their primary focus is outward facing. So job titles, again, medical affairs director, field medical director, because the medical affairs is going to have more field-based roles, obviously, because they're doing a lot of stuff outside the company. Clinical research physician or director medical affairs lead. There's 2 examples on the right-hand side, one from Sanofi and one from Pfizer for medical affairs positions. Generally, the job title is going to have somewhere in it medical affairs. And if it doesn't, then within the description for a medical affairs job, you're going to see it highlighted: healthcare professional and provider interactions, and internal and external education initiatives. So that's primarily what medical affairs does. So I want to take a minute just to talk about lifestyle and location, right? So a lot of times if I talk to people who are considering pharmaceutical job in a pharmaceutical company, they want to know about the lifestyle, right? So it is office work. So there are more routine hours, mostly, and more flexibility. So the reason that I emphasize the mostly is because although I would say in the 2 and a bit years that I've been working for pharma, I've only had to work on a weekend maybe once or twice, 3 times, because we had something that was due, right? We had a deadline, we had something that needed to get in, and it needed to be done. And when it needs to be done, you do it until it's finished. Now, there are people that I know in pharma who work many hours, who work nights, who work weekends, who work vacations, holidays, etc. I would say you don't have to, but there are those that do. So if you're considering a position, it will be wise to try to figure out the lifestyle and what the routine hours are and how often people work nights and weekends when you're evaluating a position within pharma. There are annual shutdowns, right? We get time off between Christmas and New Year's every year. Obviously, there are holidays and vacations. And I found that it is much easier to truly switch off, especially if you have a backup. So if there's somebody else who does your equivalent job and you can hand off your responsibilities to them when you go on vacation, then you can truly switch off. And then I wanted to talk about on-site, hybrid, and remote. So I think this is changing, which is important to talk about. Most big pharmas, and those are the big ones, right? GSK, Moderna, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, they are returning to a hybrid model, which means 60% of your time in the office or 3 days a week in the office. So most of the big pharma companies, they're on the East Coast, and there are a few on the West Coast, but mostly they're on the East Coast, up and down the East Coast. So if you're somebody like me who comes from Chicago, right in the center, you may need to consider relocation if you're looking at one of the big pharma companies that has a hybrid model in the office 3 days a week. Something to consider. Well, smaller companies and biotechs seem to be remaining remote. Many of them have always been remote and don't have central offices. So there may be more opportunities for remote work in the smaller companies and the biotechs. Whereas if you're looking at a big pharma, you may need to consider relocating if you're not on the East Coast or close to the company that you want to work for. Okay, so what now, right? Hopefully you're interested potentially in a role in pharma. So what do you do next, right? Where do you even start? My recommendation is based off what I did. So I'm sure there are other ways to do it, but I'm going to take you through what I did. So I leveraged LinkedIn to gather data. I went and I searched ClinDev MD-DO, and I found people on LinkedIn who are physicians who work in pharma. And once you've got a list of these people, it's easy to check out their profiles. You can look at the job descriptions of what they do. You can figure out how long they've been out of clinical work, how long they were in clinical work, if they still do clinical work, and you can note the companies that they work for. It's easy enough to follow somebody. You don't have to reach out and connect with them necessarily. You can just follow them on LinkedIn. And if you do, then when they post something, it'll pop up in your feed. You'll be able to kind of keep track of their interactions, what they do, and it is a good way to gather some information. The other thing is when you get the list of companies, you can explore their LinkedIn pages and go to their websites, right? So you can figure out what they do, how they do it, how many employees they have, how big of a company is it, where is their location, and what does their pipeline look like? And I'll explain what a pipeline is in the next slide. The other thing that's in on LinkedIn, there are professional organizations, and then there's groups that you can join that have to do with pharma or other topics of interest. And that's a good way to gather more information. Okay, so let me take you through pipelines. Pipelines are the list of the drugs the company currently has and at what stage of development they're currently in. So what TA or therapeutic area. So if you look at the image, on the left-hand side, you have oncology, immunology, neurology, and cardiology. So those are the therapeutic areas that this magical pharmaceutical company is involved in. And within those therapeutic areas, they have a total of 9 candidates. So that's the next column. And then you can see from the description which phase that they're currently in or which stage of development. So as you can see, candidate 1 is in phase 3, whereas candidates 2 through 4 are in phase 2, candidates 5 through 7 are in phase 1, and candidates 8 and 9 are in preclinical. So what does this tell you? So they have one candidate drug that looks like it's about to finish its phase 3. So that means it could have a positive readout, it could have a negative readout. If it's got a positive readout, that means it may be licensed, right? They may need a lot of medical affairs people, right? If you look at the phase 2, now they've got 3 candidates that are in phase 2, and they've got 3 candidates that are in phase 1. So those are their up and coming drugs, right? So they could have, within a short period of time, 3 drugs that are going into phase 3. So those are really big 1,000 participant kind of studies. So they're probably going to need clinical development people. And then phase 1, they've got 3 candidates. So they have in total 7 drugs, molecules that are in clinical development. So they got a lot of safety data coming in. So they may need a lot of safety people. There's opportunities there. And finally, they got 2 drugs within the preclinical phase. So I've always heard that the best thing that you've got should never be in the field. It should always be in the lab, coming up with the next great thing. So even if they get a washout, this company, if they get a washout of their drug, say the phase 3 doesn't have a positive readout and 2 of the drugs don't make it through phase 1, they've still got a backup. They've got preclinical things. They've got the next thing. So they probably have a lot of longevity. So this is the kind of way that you can assess a company based on its pipeline, what it's going on. So a company like this may be more attractive than, say, a small company that's got 1 drug that's in phase 3. So again, that phase 3 readout could be positive and it could be negative. So if it's positive, that company could be in a good way. If it's a negative readout for a company that's got 1 drug in phase 3, that could be the end of that company, right? So something to consider when you're looking. So what else can you do? Learn a little bit more. Read the posts, articles, watch the information videos, listen to podcasts. There's tons of them out there, the ones that are pharma specific, they're non-clinical career ones, they're general switching out of medicine podcasts. There's a lot of resources out there. And I would also consider subscribing to some of these free newsletters. So I subscribe to Fierce Pharma, which I felt has been very helpful for me, actually. So what this is there are newsletters that they send out. Some of them are once a week, twice a week, every day. And you can choose, as you see in the middle of this slide, you can choose which ones you receive. So the Fierce Pharma, I get the Fierce Pharma and the Fierce Zero and the Fierce Biotech newsletters. And every couple of days, I get an email, like on the right-hand side, that's got a list of articles to read. And they talk about things like big mergers, big acquisitions, results. You'll know whether a company has just laid off 10,000 people or is shutting their manufacturing department, or if a small company's just got bought out by a big company, right? So it gives, I think, a really good overview of what's happening in the pharmaceutical world. And then you could read the articles if you want more information. So that's within the bottom of that slide. I found it really useful, something to think about. Okay, now I would recommend, if you haven't already, updating your LinkedIn profile, right? Add a picture, refresh your experience section with transferable skills, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Update your skills section, put your licenses, your certifications, your courses, right? Put all the information that you possibly can into your LinkedIn profile. And the other thing that's on LinkedIn that I'll just mention very briefly are endorsements, right? So these are skills that you list that other people can then endorse you for. So say you have clinical medicine as one of your skills. You can have colleagues, people that you've worked with, go in and endorse it to say, yeah, I've worked with this person in clinical medicine and they've done a good job. So it just helps raise the impression, say, of your experience. There's lots to do on LinkedIn, and there are courses. I'm sure you could take many courses that would teach you lots of things about LinkedIn, but this is just a place to get started. All right, transferable skills. So transferable skills are skills that you have right now that are going to make you successful in any job in pharma. You just got to figure out what they call it in pharma, basically, right? So one of the things that I have found really helpful actually is this list on the left-hand side. So these are your kind of transferable skills, right? So interpersonal skills, oral communication skills, right? Public speaking skills, creative thinking, critical thinking. I mean, docs have that all over the place, right? Research skills, right? They're all things that you have done in your career as a physician that you can transfer to a job in pharma, right? And looking at lists like this just helps kind of clarify how you say that in a job interview, in your resume, in your cover letters, right? So that you're putting forward the best picture of what you have to offer the pharmaceutical company. And I found it really helpful. And then also, I just wanted to plug Marjorie Steeler's Industry Insider CME course. I've done it. I don't have any affiliations, but she has a whole module on transferable skills. So something to check out. They're very helpful, as you're about to see, on your pharma resume. Okay, so a CV is not a resume. So CVs are long, right? They can be 5, 6, 7 pages. They list every single thing you've ever done, every paper you've ever done. They're fantastic, but they're not what people use in pharma. So pharma resumes are short, 2 pages max, right? And they'll highlight your experience in any therapeutic area. So that is the cardiology, GI, urology, whatever it is, your research and academic experience. They usually have a summary section, which is a couple of sentences that sort of lay out who you are and what you've done. Your skill section, that's full of your transferable skills. And if you struggle with this, there are lots of online examples. And you could also, once you've got contacts, you can ask them to share their resume with you if they're willing. I've used JobScan just to get some resume examples. But like I said, there's lots of resources out there. You'll be able to figure it out. But it's really important because it's kind of what is going to get your resume past what I call the bots, right? Okay, so you've updated your LinkedIn profile. You've transformed your CV into a resume. My recommendation is now build your network seriously, right? Now make your connections on LinkedIn. What I did when I first started out was that I sent out requests to 10, 15, 20 people that I don't know on LinkedIn, and I asked them for a 15-minute phone call to talk about their job path, right? Their job trajectory. These are called informational interviews. And basically, you figure out from these people how they got where they are, what they do all day, and whether or not it seems interesting to you, and whether it's something that you want to pursue. Yes, there are cold reach outs. I get it. And for every 10 that you send out, you're probably going to hear from 1 or 2 people back. And that's okay, because the 2 people that write you back are going to be fantastic. They're going to be so helpful and so supportive and so willing to discuss their job, their career trajectory that is going to be worth it, right? And they'll help you build your connections. So have your 15-minute phone conversation, get all the information that you possibly can glean from this person, and then at the end, ask for introductions to 2 other people that you can talk to. And sometimes they'll be able to come up with that easily, and sometimes they won't, and that's okay too. But ask, right? Because you can then build your network. It could be people in their department, it could be people in their organization, it could be people outside of their organization, people with a similar background to you. Just build your network. Other things that you can do to build a network would be become involved in research if you can, if it's available and where you're working. You become a principal investigator or a PI. They're the people who run the clinical trials in organizations. You could be a sub-I, which is not the person in charge, but their main backup. You could serve on a institutional review board, an IRB, which is the usually organization. They review any protocols that come through and approve whether or not they can be done at the organization. If you're really established in your field, then think about becoming a KEE, a key external expert for a pharma company. If you are attending big conferences, the big ones, the big cancer ones, ID Week, any of the really large conferences, go and chat to the folks at the pharma booths, right? All pharmaceutical companies will have a representative at the really big conferences. And these are going to be your medical affair folks. So they're going to be the MSLs. They're going to be the field medical directors. And they're looking for talent, and they're looking for people to tell about their drugs, right? So they're a really good resource. They're also going to know if their company's hiring or if their company has a hiring freeze, and what's available. So definitely go chat to them. I think it's a really good way to meet people. Speaking of MSLs, the other thing is to actually leverage, if you have MSLs that come to your office or they come to the hospital. I don't think I ever encountered an MSL when I was in practice, but I certainly encountered drug reps, and they're also good contact, right? They're also going to know if their company's hiring or not hiring, if it's a good company to work for, or if it isn't. So another place to glean information. And also touch base with friends, college, med school, residency, fellowship. I actually got my connection for the job that I work in now through a friend of mine that I had worked with who worked for AstraZeneca. And she put me in touch with 2 other people in AstraZeneca who I then had conversations with. And it was through one of them that I actually got the recommendation for the job that I have now. So it works, and it's important. So something to think about. Okay, now you're ready to apply. You've got your resume. My recommendation is set up a baseline resume, right? So it's just a sort of a generic resume for a particular function, right? So you could have a clin dev resume, you could have a patient safety resume. And as you're looking at companies, you might find on their website something called a talent community, right? It's like, join our talent community. So what that means is you fill out some information and then you upload your resume, and it goes into a pool, which in theory, if they're looking to fill a post, that they will pull people from that candidate pool. Now, whether or not that happens, I don't know. But what I do know is that when I've joined talent communities, what happens is that I will periodically get emails from that company with open positions. Now, the majority of those open positions have absolutely nothing to do with clinical development or anything else I would be interested in. But every once in a while, I'll see a listing that I can click on and apply for. So I think there is some value in that. The other thing with a baseline resume is that it's what you can send to recruiters. So don't be afraid of recruiters. I was when I first started, but I'm not anymore, because actually they can be very helpful, and you can send them like a generic resume, right? So they may not have any position available or know of anything specific, but you can send this sort of generic clin dev resume to them. When you actually apply for a job, you need to tailor your baseline resume for that job posting to get past the bots, right? So there are these AI filters, right, that look at all the resumes that come through and gatekeep, right, and kick out the ones that don't meet the basic requirements, So what that means is, if the job description says experience in clinical medicine, and your resume says 12 years of healthcare experience, it's not going to recognize that, right? It's going to kick it out because it says healthcare experience and not clinical medical experience. So you need to match the words on your resume exactly to the words that are on the job posting. It's tedious, but it will get you through. It will get you through the bots. My other recommendation when you're ready to apply, keep an Excel spreadsheet of who you've applied to, okay? I applied to a lot of jobs, a lot. And I could easily lose track of what I've applied to and what I haven't. And the jobs get reposted, right? So you could apply to a job, be rejected, and then 3 weeks later, that exact job comes back on the market. You've already applied for it. You've already been rejected. You don't need to apply for it again, right? If I didn't keep an Excel spreadsheet, I wouldn't be able to keep track of what jobs I've applied for and which ones I haven't and which ones I've been rejected from. So something doesn't need to be an Excel spreadsheet, could be something else, but I recommend keeping track, some way of keeping track of what jobs you've applied for. Okay, a couple more things about assessing a job posting and deciding whether or not it's appropriate for you to apply as an entry level. On the left-hand side, I would say go for it. If it says 2 to 5 years of pharma experience, almost all of them are going to say that. Very rarely will you get a job posting that says you don't need any experience. They almost always say 2 to 5 years. And 2 to 5 years are for their entry level positions. And you can apply, right? You don't need to have 2 years of experience. You can apply. If it says you excel, you have to excel or proven excellence in a matrix environment, guess what? Clinics and hospitals are matrices. You've got it. Excellent interpersonal and decision-making skills. Yeah, we're physicians. We have that. Sound clinical acumen and a wide range of therapeutic area knowledge. Great. If they're looking for somebody who's got a lot of hematology, oncology experience, and that is your specialty, you got it. Go for it. Where I would say probably not is if it's asking for greater than 5 years of pharma experience. Usually it's a lot more than that. Usually it's 8 or 10 or 15. And even I can't apply for those jobs yet, right? They're much higher level. There's a lot of stepping stones and promotion positions within pharmaceutical companies. And if they want more than 5 years of experience, that's what they're going for. And it's not an entry level position. If they ask for a specific specialty or clinical experience, generally they mean it, right? So if they say they want board certified oncologist, somebody who's got experience in neurology, or they have, board certified in ophthalmology, they mean it, right? So if you're not, then don't waste the electrons. It's not worth applying. The other thing to check is if they want some sort of licensing, right? So state license in Wisconsin, or if they want something specific. Generally they don't, right? But pay attention if they say they want somebody who's board certified, if they want somebody who's licensed, because they'll need it, they'll want that. So if you don't have it, then probably not the job for you. Okay, prepping for an interview, right? You've applied, you've been accepted, you got an interview. Excellent. So what's going to happen? So the first interview is going to be a screening interview with an HR person or a recruiter. And it's going to be a very generic screening interview, right? They're going to want to know, why are you leaving clinical medicine? When are you going to be available? Why are you interested in this company? Why are you interested in ClinDev, right? General sort of things. Easy questions to answer, generally. The second interview is going to be what's called the hiring manager, right? So they are the person who is spearheading this hiring process, right? It doesn't mean that's the person you're going to be working with or even working for. They could be just somebody in the department who is the one who is responsible for the interview process. The questions in that interview are going to be much more specific. They're going to want to know about your experience. They're going to want to know things that are much more relevant and specific to the job, right? They will also tell you more information, and you'll get a better feeling for what the job will entail. But it's going to be much more specific. If you get a third interview, sometimes things go to third, fourth, fifth interviews, apparently. It could be with a panel, so a bunch of people. It could be on Teams, so you're going to have 3 or 4, people that are going to be asking you questions. And it might require a presentation, which is something I think that happens quite frequently in medical affairs. So something to be prepared for. The other thing, and this was brand new to me when I applied to Pharma, was situation or behavioral interview questions. Okay. I had a whole interview that was based on behavioral interview. And these are questions like, tell me about a time when you disagreed with your manager. Okay. They want you to tell a story. And you need to learn to answer these questions in what's called the STAR format, or situation, thoughts, actions, results. Okay. So these are things like, okay, the situation was I disagreed with my line manager on how to proceed with the document. My thoughts were, we won't be successful in completing this document if we don't get aligned. So my action was, I sat down with a one-on-one with my line manager, and we discussed both of our needs for this document. The result was we finished the document on time with excellent results. Okay. That's a quick one, right? STAR. Now, there's lots of YouTube videos on STAR format and how to answer those questions. Like I said, it's basically a story. They want you to tell a story that includes all these things. And you need to, obviously, we're physicians, we get it, but you need to prep for these interviews, right? Find out about the company, find out about, if you know who's going to be interviewing you, find out about the drugs that they use, find out about the latest papers that they have, find out everything you can in order to be super prepared for the interview, and know why you want to join the company, why you're interested in the position, and why you'd be good at it, right? All right, evaluating an offer. Yay, they're offering you the job. Fantastic. Okay. Now, an offer from a pharmaceutical company is not as complicated as, say, RVUs, but there are some subtle nuances to it. So something I'll just take you through quick. An offer is going to include a base salary plus a bonus structure or short-term incentives, long-term incentives, which are company shares if the company is publicly traded, and then a benefits type package. Consider the whole package and not just the base salary. And always ask about relocation support and other sign-on bonuses, and try to figure out, if there's other money that might come in from somewhere with this offer. The salary range for entry-level physicians generally runs in the low to mid 200s, right? 225, 245, 250, generally. Now, that may be a great salary, base salary, remember, doesn't include your bonus. Bonuses can be 20, 25% on top of your base salary every year based on merit, right? And what the company accomplished in a year. But if you are an interventional radiologist, if you are a cardiologist, right? Mid to low 200s can seem, and very well might be a pay cut, right? So keep in mind that this is the first step on a very tall staircase, all right? This is an entry-level job, and the only way there is to go is up, right? And the salaries increase as you get to higher levels, right? So there's medical director, and then there's senior medical director, and then there's, global lead, and then there's, clinical head, and there's lots of areas for promotion all the way up to vice presidents and senior vice presidents, and they make a lot more money. So something to think about if that is a consideration for you. The other thing you might want to look into when you're looking at an offer is whether or not, if you want to continue to do clinical medicine, part-time, 1 week a month, every other weekend, whatever, can you do it while you work for the company? And if that's going to be supported. If you have a side business or anything else, something to think about when you're evaluating the offer, whether that's going to be a problem or not. Okay, my final thoughts, right? Be patient with yourself and the process. It can take a really long time, right? I've heard 12 to 15 months, 18 months, right? Depending on the market. If that is too long for you right now, if you need to make a change right now, but you are interested in going into pharma, consider maybe getting an intermediate job or somehow changing what you're doing right now so that you can give yourself the time and the energy to look into pharma and to look at getting one of these positions. While you're looking, keep reaching out, pick up on all the resources, keep up with your contacts. And just remember, you are not alone. I think one of the things that was the most amazing to me for the first time I went to a C conference was walking into that huge conference hall and seeing thousands of other physicians who were looking at non-clinical work. And I thought to myself, wow, I am not the only one. And you know what? Neither are you. There's lots of us out there. Reach out, talk to people, make connections, right? It's a huge community. And also just remember, you are qualified to do a job in pharma. No question, you absolutely are. So like I said, give yourself the time and the energy to really find what you're looking for. And remember, you know what, if you don't like it, you can always go back. All right, that's it. Thanks. Any questions?
You know, lawyers like to ask questions. Dr. Philbin, that was fantastic. If you don't mind, and you can take the fifth on this, not the fifth, but you can take a pass. So you're practicing pediatrician in Chicago. Why'd you decide to transition?
Yeah.
And you can pass on that.
I know I won't because it's important. So first off, I had done research in the past. So there were a lot of reasons I chose to leave clinical medicine. I think the primary one was that fundamentally it just wasn't a good fit for me. The stress and the level of responsibility got to be too much in the long run. So leaving was sort of an easy decision, right? I wanted to spend more time with my family and I wanted less stress. Why I went into research was because I had that previous experience, right? And it seemed like an easier transition, or just made sense within my career trajectory.
How'd you end up in London, doctor?
So it's interesting, actually. So, as I said, most of the pharmaceutical companies are based on the East Coast. So my family and I were in Illinois, and AstraZeneca has a office in Gaithersburg in Maryland. And neither myself nor my husband had any interest in moving to the East Coast. So I am an Irish citizen through my grandparents. So when they offered me the job, I asked if I could go to the Cambridge office as opposed to one of the places in the US. And they said yes.
I love it. And how long, obviously you have a little bit of a head start. You're very well organized. It's very helpful. How long did your particular transition take to, like, I'm serious about this, I'm going to do something about it, to you're in London?
It took about a year. Because I think I started we moved in October of 2022. And I started looking at least a year before that.
You need to maintain your boards and your license to do these jobs?
Some you do, some you don't. In the current role that I'm in right now, I don't, but I have, right? I've kept up my license, I've kept up my board certification. There will be roles where that will be a requirement. You'll have to. Yep.
And I mean, I think those things may vary, but does your company pay for you to take your CME and to keep the license on the boards and things like that, or is that all kind of on your own?
They'll pay for part of it. They'll pay for the license through the state of Illinois, but they won't pay for like CME or courses or the other things that come along with it. So they'll pay for part of it.
So you talked about the stress and obviously the lifestyle and things like that. Let's talk about the intellectual stimulation. how would you compare the intellectual stimulation of your current role versus, being a primary care pediatrician?
Yeah, I think it's much broader, I think. It's a good question because yes, there's intellectual stimulation. It's not so much about, you know, pediatric stuff. There's hardly any of that. But there's a lot of other things. So I've learned about monoclonal antibodies. I've learned about COVID and COVID infections. I've moved on to other molecules and I'm learning about, the disease processes that those treat. So it's much broader, lots of different kinds of medical conditions, but also about drugs, about learning about clinical trials, um, learning about regulatory reporting, learning about safety, monitoring. It's a much broader intellectual stimulation.
And because of the time difference, and because AstraZeneca and any of these big pharmaceuticals are global companies, do you have like conference calls at like crazy times? Like, I mean, so we're doing this, it's 5 o'clock where you are, it's noontime where Kelly and I are. Does that kind of happen in your field?
So it does. What happens is that I work with Europeans that basically in the morning, right? So they're
Okay.
online an hour before I am in the UK, right? So I'll touch base with my European colleagues in the morning or people who are in Cambridge. And then at 1 o'clock, the US comes online, right? And then we have our meetings and our conversations and everything, and we work with everybody in the US till 5 o'clock our time. And then we sign off and they work for, another 4 or 5 hours. So it actually works really well, especially if you have like a colleague who's in the US. But I found I do, what we need to do in the morning and we consolidate it in the afternoon and then they take it, after I've signed off. So it's you accommodate the lifestyle, you accommodate all of the time zones.
And you guys respect each other, it seems as though the part of the team. Let's you talk about the breadth. So for these entry level jobs, are they looking for generalists like a primary care physician, like a pediatrician or internal medicine with broad knowledge of therapeutic areas? Are they looking for specialists? I want a neurologist. Does it vary? Maybe you could address that.
Yeah. It does, right? So there are ones that they're going to be interested in generalists that have medical knowledge, right? That's what they're after. They need your medical knowledge and your understanding of medical processes in order to help them get the drug to market, basically. And you're going to have positions where they want a neurologist or they want an ophthalmologist or oncologist, right? So you're going to have both. I've seen a lot of different specialties listed. I wouldn't say that there are any that would be, you wouldn't be able to get a job in pharma, but also generalists are just as needed. It's just going to depend on the role, what they're after.
And how much of your work, so you're a pediatrician, how much of your work is for molecules? I'll use your lingo, targeted towards kids versus molecules targeted towards adults, or I guess if you understand, like how much of your work
Mhm.
is pediatric based?
Yeah. So basically, the way that the drug development works is that it almost always starts in adults, right? So they'll have a drug that they're developing that's going to treat, say, um, infectious disease, right? So staphylococcal. And it'll start with we'll start with the development in adults. And then once the adult trials are underway, then they'll look at using that same drug in pediatric patients. So then there will be a pediatric development plan that comes along that's usually required by regulatory authorities, right? Like the EMA in Europe or the FDA. You need to, if the condition exists in children, then you need to look at um, developing that drug for children as well. So I would say it's about 90-10, right? 90% of it's going to be adult work. There's some, I mean, oncology is different. Vaccines are different, obviously. That's, very focused in pediatrics, but adults first and then kids, basically.
You mentioned key external expert, KEE, if I wrote that down correctly.
Yep.
those people get paid?
They can, yeah. So you can be on a contract, I guess, with a pharmaceutical company, and to be their, to be their expert that they, turn to you when they need feedback on how do we develop this protocol, or, how do we get this drug into the market? So but there is a compensation for that. I've never been in KE, so I don't know the other end of it, but there's definitely, we've worked to establish contracts with our KEs.
No, I'm assuming you applied for a job that said 2 to 5 years of experience. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So tell us what, if anything, they did to train you once you showed up the first day. You said, "Oh my God, what am I going to do now?"
Yeah, yeah. So there are so many SOPs and work instructions and guidance about how you do everything, right? So there is you get trained. Basically, you have, the company based training on everything that the company does, right? So there's all of that, all of those documents if you need to refer to them, right? So that's part of it. I guess you call it like the didactic part of it, right? But you also learn as you're doing it from other people who are doing it. So I had other physicians who'd been in the company for longer than I am that basically I could reach out to and say, what am I doing? How do I do this? What is this involved? And they were really supportive to get me up to speed on what I needed to do
And
and how to do it.
are you doing that now for some newbies with less
Yeah,
experience?
yeah, absolutely. So if somebody comes on and they're new, there's an what they call onboarding and offboarding, right? So if you're joining a project, you'll be onboarded, which means you'll meet with the people who are working on the project. They'll bring you up to speed on what's happened, what are we doing, what are where are we with the milestones, what needs to be done, and sort of where you fit into the project and the work.
And then a couple of things. One, you mentioned a little bit. You talked about if they only had one drug and it didn't whatever pan out or whatnot, it didn't get
Right.
approved, that you're kind of screwed. Let's talk about job security in industry. Can you want to give a few thoughts about that? And how much
Yeah.
job security there is, how much mobility there is if things do go awry.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a lot of there can be a lot of fluidity in big companies, not just pharma companies. I'm getting the impression that it's all companies, right? That it's a big company, and so if they decided that they're gonna um focus their workforces in, say, London and Dubai, and not in Canada or in the US or Mexico, then there is a potential that your job will be eliminated in the location that you're in, and it will be reopened somewhere else. And that, I mean, I think that happens, I wouldn't say frequently, but it's a potential, right? So I think it's hard to describe like job security as such in a big industry and a big company, right? Things can change, priorities can change, and jobs may be eliminated because of it.
And would you say in general, I'm just guessing here, that there's more risk and more reward in the smaller companies that have fewer bets and fewer employees because they're giving you stock and things like that than in the big giants?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's accurate. Yeah.
All right. And then because you're going to have insider information that could really move markets and things like that. Do they have restrictions on your like investment activities when you work for in like what you're doing with clinical trials and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely levels of confidentiality, right? So there's company confidential, there is group confidence, and they're very specific about what can and cannot be shared, right? With anybody, but specifically with other people who work in pharmaceutical companies, right? So you can't go have a conversation with, your friend from Pharma B company and tell them all about the drug that you're developing, right? So there is a level of confidentiality involved.
All right, I think it's going to be the last question. And I saved the most loaded one for the bet, and I already know what the answer is. Do you get any sense that you are working for the dark side now that you're there, right? Because people can have, say, drug company. Yeah, no way in hell, right?
Yeah.
Could you address that? I think that might be a 500-pound gorilla in the room.
Yeah. I have never felt that way. I have I have always been appreciative of new treatments, new drugs, new vaccines, right? That are gonna help people and help the world, right? I think we need to be continuing to develop new treatments, right? There are emerging infectious diseases, there's a need. So I have never felt that it was the dark side or, that it was some sort of evil entity, right? But I accept that it is a for profit, right? At the end of the day, these companies need to make money, right? To stay in business, right? So they are selling something, that's for sure, right? They're making something and they're selling it. They're a business. But I don't see it as the dark side. I see it as a reality.
And fair to say, you've never been encouraged or instructed or tolerated to fudge anything, to wink and to blink and to nod to get something with the data or anything like that. That's
No,
not going on.
no,
Fair
no,
enough.
no, no, no. It's like the exact opposite, right? Like the impetus is make sure that this is absolutely accurate and absolutely correct. And we're not saying anything that isn't the truth, as transparent as you possibly can be. That is always the emphasis.
And so I just take my background, Dr. Phil, we train a lot of expert witnesses, and one of the biggest revelations they get, she means, all we get to do is tell the truth, whatever the answer is. I'm like, yeah, and it's like this, like, oh, that's different then.
Yeah.
Same idea, obviously. Dr. Phil, but thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for the opportunity.